So may I remind everyone, no, that our first formative test will be on Friday next week. Friday, usually it's done on over a week, over Friday and a Saturday, no. So our will be on 27, no, 27 and 28. It will be about 100 items, no. On August 27, 28. 100 item. Yes, no. You follow. You may ask what's in the test. There will be programming assignments like the it will be similar to the practice test which I'm going to give you over this weekend. No, so you will have problems to solve. You will have programs to write. No, and then yeah, there will be multiple choice questions. No? Like which computer uh, had the first game and what is the first game? Which computer had the first keyboard? Okay, who broke the Enigma machine code? Follow, and then like who was the first programmer? Okay, who was the first programmer? Yes. When was the first computer introduced or invented? Who was the first programmer? What was the popular program that was presented? Okay, and then who invented the stored program concept? You follow? Which computer implemented the first accumulator? Which computer implemented the first accumulator? Who broke the Enigma machine code? Many others, because we will still take up history of internet today. No, all the things, history of Microsoft, Windows. No, those we couldn't cover. You covered this yourself. These are very, very brief, easy readings. No, you follow the history of Microsoft Windows, the history of internet. Okay, you follow. We'll cover that today. Anyway, so we have covered Apple computers. No, kasali ito. Microcomputers and Apple computers and the computer monitor. Okay, very easy reading. Anyway, for now, let me show you the average on the IAS computer, no, or rather on the PDP1 computer. Okay, okay. This is the bottom up loop, which shows the factorial program. Okay, so what we'll do is to revise this, so that we can make a program to do average, no, average of three numbers. Person. Okay. Any questions so far? We'll do this quickly anyway. We have been through this several times. Okay. So instead of the partial product, we'll have the partial sum. Okay. And then instead of the next multiplier, we have the next addend. And we will insert the final divisor. Which is in M of 4. Three lang ito, no? This will be 3 because we'll compute. So we'll erase everything. And then we'll change the addressing of our numbers because this is now 4. Okay. Doon na yung 4, no? So we'll have to change. So this will now be a JMP5. You follow? No? Okay. And then next addend. So the next addend is we'll just store it anyway. No? Okay. The next addend is an M of 3. No? You still have to insert something here. No? We'll store our final divisor. LAs. This will be here. Then we will store our final divisor to M of 4, no? So duck 4, that's store, no? It's a little strange. Now the question, there's a question here, all about history lang, sir? No, it's all about programming the analytical engine, the IAS, the PDP1. Do you follow? No, it's not just all about history. It also has to do a lot of programming. Okay, do you follow? No, programming the analytical engine, the IAS, and the PDP1. 3 computers which we have discussed. No, also about the structure of the computers. No, okay. In terms of instruction code, what's the main difference between the IAS, no, and the PDP1? Okay, so magkaiba sila ng instruction, no? In terms of memory size, what's the difference between the IAS and the PDP1? Okay, per instruction, no? Is it timed? It will be a 2-day exam, but I think there will be a limit of time because you can't all have the whole weekend to do this, no? Because in the past our problem is intermittent connection. Intermittent connection can also stop the execution or the completion of the test. Do you follow? So you will have a long time to answer. Okay. Each question is not timed. The whole test will be timed, but you will be given a whole time. So which means when you start, you will be given about 3 to 4 hours. So you will have the whole time. If your internet is lost, you can just wait a while and then go back later when the internet is back. Okay. Any questions? No? Any other questions? So let's go back to this. So this will be M4 receives AC. We are doing this because we want this to store our number 3. Okay. So this will be now 6. Then we will have a ZSA. The good thing about ZSA is this will be fixed, no? And then where's our loop? This will be now be jump 9. Okay, jump 9, and this will now be jump 7. The halt is now jump 17. Okay, you know where the loop starts, no? It's here where the loop starts. Okay, then we say sub 2. So okay, sub 2. This will be anyway. This will be AC. So AC will have 3. No? And then we say duck 4, so this will have 3. And then we say sub 2, so the actual content will be 3 minus 1. Okay, so this will become 2, and deposit 3. So this will become 2. Okay, this will be our next added. Okay, we will this will not be a halt yet, no? Because we are going to divide, no? Okay, we're going to do a division here, so this is temporary. Okay, duck 3, this will be 2. So we have LAC 1. So LA, this will be 3. Okay, instead of mul, we will have add. Okay, because this is summation, not factorial. Okay, add 3. So the actual content will be 3 plus 2. So AC will have 5. Okay, do you follow? Okay, so, and then we say duck 1. So the accumulator will now have 5. Okay, and LAC 3. So the accumulator will have 2 because 3 is now 2. Do you follow? Okay. So anyway, I'll give you a practice test, no? I'll give you a practice test, so you wouldn't be surprised. Okay, you wouldn't be surprised at the actual test. Okay, so you should not be nervous about the actual test because you will have a practice test. It's a smaller version of the test. Okay, so don't be nervous because you will have a taste test. You will taste. If it's difficult, you will know whether it's be difficult during the taste test. So you'll have to study more. Okay. Anyway, you'll have another week to study. LAC3, so we'll have 2 here, no? And then sub 2, which is this will become actual content 2 minus 1. Okay, and then yeah, doc 3. So this will now be 1. This 1 and doc 3, this will be our next addend. Okay. So eventually I will not trace the whole thing, no? Skip if 0 accumulator. The accumulator is not 0, but when it becomes 0, it will skip to 17. No? Then our 17, we will load the sum, which is in ano, no? So the sum is now in M1, LAC1, LAC1. So now this becomes 5. No, 6 now, because we just skip the whole process. Okay, LAC1, assuming because we don't have time, no? To make a long story short, we know this already, no? LAC1, so this becomes 6, and then we say 18, we say give 4. Okay, so we divide it by 4, and then we store the final answer, no? We deposit the final answer, we will deposit to 1. Okay, so this will become, eventually this becomes 2, and then we will say this is 20, so this now becomes JMP. So this is the answer to the assignment. Okay, do you follow? No, I'll post this. Okay. Okay. So do you already know? No, I have already told you the story about the ENIAC patent. Story of the ENIAC patent. Did I do that last meeting? Let me check. It's in our no. Okay. Yes, I've already told you, no, we had a meeting on the ENIAC patent. So the ENIAC patent was cancelled. It was invalidated during the early 1973, I believe. No, it's a bad news, no, because it brought out a dark truth in the computing history, where okay, the inventors of ENIAC, no, copied a lot of features, no, a lot of features from the ABC computer by John Vincent Atanasoff and claimed it as their own. So that's why they were not granted the patent. However, the good news is without the patent, the manufacturers were able to manufacture, no, their own version of the stored program computer and sell them without violation of any patent laws. No? That's why the technology prospered. It prospered a lot during the 1950s to the 1970s. No? And in the 1970s, no, the microcomputers were invented without any restriction, no, without any legal restriction, because the stored program concept anyway has no patent. So that gave way to the invention of the microcomputers, which we now use, no? Which we now use until today. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So you can read this, no? The verdict to the ENIAC case, where the ENIAC patent was cancelled by a circuit judge in Missouri. Yeah, sa Iowa State ito eh. Wisconsin. Circuit judge in Wisconsin. Thereby granting IBM and DEC the right to manufacture and sell stored program computers, no, without any legal restriction. So it improved. The technology improved anyway, no. So 1952 yung ano, no, IAS. Now in 1956, these were the days of the IBM when the transistor was invented. IAS and EDVAC were vacuum tubes. No? The first generation were vacuum tube computers. So the 701 were vacuum tube. No? Vacuum tubes yung mga 701, 702. But the 709, no, which was later released, no, is the 709 is a transistor based. You know what a transistor is, no? Let's compare a vacuum tube and a transistor? Williams tube na lang, no? Maliit kasi yung Williams vacuum tube. Okay. Williams vacuum tubes are actually like small capacitors, like this, no? These are smaller versions of the old vacuum tube, so they can now occupy a much smaller space. Okay, but they're still very hot. Okay, and then here's a transistor. Okay, transistor, solid state. Right, by this we mean solid state transistor. No? Ito, no? This is a transistor. No? The transistors then were bigger than this, but more or less. There's also another transistor like this, circular. These are the different packaging for transistors. No? Do you follow? Now, there were circular transistors because they were made to fit the Williams tubes circuit. They can be used to replace the Williams tube circuit like this. Do you follow? No? Okay. Okay. You follow? These are the no, because it was in 1954 that Sony released the transistor. It's released from Japan. No? So when was the transistor released? In 1954 by Sony. Okay. It was invented by William Shockley in 1948. By then, it was not yet very popular. So what's popular was the Williams vacuum tubes, the smaller versions of large vacuum tube diodes. Okay. So in 1959, the semiconductor was invented, which means that, okay, ICs can now be made. Okay. Do you follow? Okay. So, okay. The second generation of computers is 1956 to 1963. But the versions of PDP1 were already, these are transistor based, no? Transistor based, no? But the later versions of PDP1 were, no, were IC based. Okay, so the IBM 709, 7090 were transistor based computers. The 701 to 704 are vacuum tubes, no? Williams vacuum tubes. Do you follow? No? So yung mga PDP1 to PDP4, remember PDP1 was released in 1960, no? 1960 kasi 1959 siya na-introduce, no? Some texts will say 1959, some will say 1960, no? Okay. So in 1960, Sony began to manufacture televisions using transistors, no? Also transistor radios during 1960s. So replacing the Williams vacuum tubes, rendering them obsolete because the Williams tubes are hot and then they easily get busted because they generate a lot of heat. Okay? Any questions so far? So ito yung mga popular second generation of computers. In 1959, no, COBOL was invented. It was implemented in the 1790 IBM 790. Remember, Fortran was already running there. So from 1965 to 1971, this is the third generation of computers where ICs were used instead of transistors. Let's Google ICs. Have you seen ICs yourselves? IC is in short for integrated circuit. Oh, is this an old IC? This is a new IC, no? Yung mga circular, these are large scale ICs. This is an IC. Okay. Motorola's 8008, which was the processor of the first IBM PC. No? This is the simplest version, can fit into this. No? Let's look at for Motorola. No, it's not. Is it Motorola or Intel? I think it's an Intel. No? Yes, that's on the Intel 8008 processor, no? Which can now fit into an IC. The later version is 8080. The next version, is already run the IBM PC. This is the Motorola 8080, which runs on the Zilog. Okay, the Zilog Z80 computer is the Zilog computer is the personal computer, that runs CPM, which is the first operating system. Okay, what is the first operating system? It's called CPM, which later became DOS. Okay, you follow? Well, look at that, no? The year of the invention of the CPM. Okay. So any questions so far? So 1960s ito, no? Univac was considered. Then the second generation is 1956 to 1963. So 1965 to 1971. Univac is 1963. So hindi pa masyadong, it's not, 1965 is the formal, you follow? In terms of DEC, what are the DEC computers that were, from 1965? Let's look at the chronology again. Okay? Kasi 1965 yung third generation of computers. Okay? We will know that these computers are made of ICs or made of what? Okay? So the computers from 1950 basta hanggang 704, no? 55. Okay? So from 1958 or 1959, these are now the second generation because these are now transistorized, no? 7030 transistorized na. 7090, these are transistorized. But from 1965, we now have the S360, these are IC based, no? From 1965, the PDP1 is already a transistor based, no? The main difference between S360 and 7094 is 7094 is based on transistors. Do you follow? S360 is the first IC based, no? Integrated circuit. PDP7 is the first IC based DEC computer. Do you follow? Okay. Any questions so far? Let's just hold this like this because it's still useful, no? Let's look for. So that's the third generation of computers from 1964, sometimes 1965 to 1971. No, depende sa other sources will tell you certain. Okay, just delete this because this is a duplicate. Sorry, no. Any questions so far? So the first generation of computers are vacuum tube diodes. The second generation of computers are made of transistors. The third generation are made of integrated circuits. Okay. And the fourth generation are made of microcomputers. What's a microprocessors? No? 1971. Remember, it's in when was the Apple computer? 1973. No, it's a microprocessor. What is a microprocessor? A microprocessor is an IC. Do you follow? Which has everything into it, including the set of registers. Okay? The main difference between a plain IC, an old 8008 and an 8088 is that the registers, the registers accumulator, multiplier quotient are outside of the IC. When you say a microprocessor, it is a complete package with the ALU and the control unit housed on the same package. Do you get my point? What's a microprocessor? It is a package. It's an integrated circuit which contains everything. The registers, the ALU, no? Kasi yung dating the old the third generation of computers have their processors in an IC, but not the registers. The registers are outside the IC. Do you follow? No? Do you follow? No? So the registers, the accumulator, the program counter are there. No? Inside, everything is inside the microprocessor, which makes the motherboard which occupies much lesser space in the motherboard. Do you follow? So the motherboard between uh, a third generation of computers is much bigger than the motherboard of a microprocessor. Do you follow? Okay, thereby giving the way to the invention of the personal computers. Okay, so these are the Hewlett Packard was the HP. Remember bought DEC later. Okay. In the Zilog Z80, the Zilog Z80 is actually the first computer, no, which runs CPM. 1959, IBM announced a personal computer, but they did not release it yet. No, they released their first computer after the 1970s. Okay, so the first computer that runs the 8008, Intel 8008, no, it's an IC chip. It's not a microprocessor. Okay, it's a processor. It's called a TTL processor. Okay, because when we say nowadays a microprocessor, it has everything. Okay. Hewlett Packard introduced HP 9038, which contains the basic language. Do you follow? Okay. Early byte-oriented microprocessor, no? But it's not considered. The 8080 is a microprocessor. Micral N, okay, produced by the French, no? This was the first microcomputer seen by Apple Inc., Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. They are MIT's employees, no? The first personal computer is considered to be the Micral N, no? In 1973. Okay, the first personal computer using a microprocessor. Okay, so this is the fourth generation of computers. Okay, remember, no? Fourth generation of computers. Let's look at that again. No? The fourth generation is from 1971 to 1980. Okay, you follow. So there's so many computers here. This includes the IBM computers and the Apple computers already. Okay, so 1971, 19 what? Let's call the date. Okay. 1964 to 1971. That's the third, no? So 1971 to 1980, that's a long period. To 1980, that's the fourth generation of computers. What's the difference between a fourth generation and a third generation? The fourth generation is microprocessor based. The third generation is IC based. So anyway, a microprocessor is also an IC, which contains a lot more things. No? It contains registers. Okay. While a TTL processor, it's called then during the third generation, a TTL processor only contains the ALU, but the registers and the control unit. But the registers are outside, no, in the motherboard of the computer itself. No? Okay, so ito, 19 compute, ano? Altair 800 is 1974, no? By MITS. Nandito sa, remember in MITS, no? This Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I don't know what MITS is. Ganito, no? Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry System Sensor. This is where Steve Wozniak worked before. This is a company in New Mexico that manufactures calculators. Okay, so Altair 8800 is the first CPU computer that runs the 8080, which is also the same microprocessor used by IBM. Okay. Toshiba produced their own microcomputer in 1974, okay, called SPM 8008. It was announced in 1974 to have used the Intel 8080. Okay. Now, what happened to DEC? DEC invented microcomputers to be used as terminal control, to their mini computers. They did not produce personal computers like, or personal computers, like the Apple and the IBM PC. Hindi na. Okay. By 1977, home computers became very popular with the programming language called BASIC. By 1975, 79, I was in college in 1983, and we had a Zilog Z80, okay, running the CPM or MPM operating system. Zilog C80 was the first, and CPM is the first operating system to run on a personal computer. IBM computers began running DOS and later Windows in 1979. Okay, any questions so far? Let's look at the history of Apple computers. So, because it's not included there, 1976, I think that's when Apple introduced their own PC. Okay, any questions? We just finish this because this is part of our. If I can't finish, you finish reading this. Okay. So remember that Steve Wozniak is an employee at MITS, a company that makes calculators, And then out of their own garage, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak invented the first Apple computer, 1976, when Apple Inc., originally known as Computers, was founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Okay, they went out of their jobs. They resigned from their jobs, and assembled a personal computer at their garage. They introduced the Apple I in 1976 with a single motherboard. Okay, and then the Apple II was introduced later about that year. So these were the popular computers we had as college students, Apple I and Apple II. Okay, so let's look at a picture of that. Apple II na lang. They look the same. Oh, I programmed this many times. This is how it looks like. The CPU and the housing for the keyboard are integrated. It can be connected to a tape drive. I don't know what this is. And there's a computer monitor. Okay, there are many other versions of the Apple II. Okay, 1976. Okay. Apple III was released in 1980. Okay, it runs the first home computer with a graphical user interface. Okay, was the Apple Lisa. Okay, it has a simple Windows, Apple Lisa, it has a graphical user interface. Which computer runs a mouse first? Let's Google that. I think it's Apple III, Kasi meron na siyang Xerox Alto, which 1973, but which Apple computer? (1983). That's correct, The Lisa computer. Okay. The Lisa computer. It's the first Apple computer with a mouse. So, you follow? This is the Apple Lisa. Okay, that's what's released in 1979. And by 1984, 5 years after, the Apple company released a graphical user interface and called that personal computer the Macintosh computer. This is their high-end version. Okay, this runs an operating system known as System 1. It's like Windows, Okay, it's like Windows. But the first computer which runs a Windows-like operating system was Apple Lisa. Okay? In 1979. But in 1984, Apple computers are already running Windows-like. Now, while IBM computers are running DOS computers, DOS of OS. Do you follow? No. Let's look at an old, no, Mac computer. Graphical user interface. Xerox Alto, no, is the first computer with a mouse. So the graphical interface originally came with the Xerox computer, no? Kasi yung may mouse, and then it became popular with, you know, with Apple computer. In 1981, when was Paint invented? This is the graphical user interface, no, of the Mac, the old Mac, which is like the Mac OS that we are having, no? It's still like that. Okay, we follow. This is, I think, this is the IBM OS2. This is an OS2 interface. So that's how it looks by then. Even until now, it looks the same, right? Ganyan talaga yung mga Mac. The taskbar is on the top. Okay. So Apple Lisa and Macintosh computers were the first computers, no, that were running a fully working graphical user interface. Okay. Paintbox was invented by a digital imaging company in 1981. The usual paint that we have used for drawing. So 1970 yung Xerox, no. The Xerox machine was the Xerox the Xerox Spark, which was the first computer to use a mouse. Okay, they follow? Was that Simon? Hanggang anong oras ba tayo? 11 o'clock. Next meeting, I'm going to give you, I'll finish these topics, no? The history. Look at this. Any questions so far? So you look at this yourself. There's a lot of details, no? You may not need to discuss all of them, no? Wala na tayong, this is self-explanatory anyway, no? You should have had this as ano. IBM PC. Monitor muna tayo. When was the first, what was the first computer with a monitor? It's a PDP1, no? 1959. Mali ito, no? The Uniscope 300 is had a built-in monitor. It was not the first computer because the first computer who had a monitor is the PDP1 in 1960. Do you follow? The touch screen was invented in way back in 1965. It did not become very popular. The Xerox Alto computer, which was having a mouse, had a monochrome display, no, black and white. Okay, 1973. No, it's a green, but it's a green screen. However, what's the difference between a monochrome and a normal CRT display during the time? A monochrome has higher resolution. It has finer text, no? Mas finer siya. But it cannot display graphics. Okay. The first resistive touchscreen was in 1975, and it was not produced until 1982. Okay. Because by then, by the 1980s, there were already mobile computing devices, no? That can have, pen. 90s. No? The Apple I was released in 1976, and the Apple II also the same year later. To have built-in video output port, no, which can now display video. It's the same video that you will have in your VHS, no, tape video players, if you have seen them. If you haven't, don't mind. LED display was first invented in 1977. They were very expensive. That's why they were not readily available for purchase at the consumer market. Although they were invented in 1977, they were only sold 30 years after, during the it is 2007. Okay, CRT display was still very popular. 1977, Apple II released with a color display monitor. When was the Lisa? I think it's still 1977, no? Lisa. Or 1980 na. Because it's the predecessor of the Mac. 1983 na pala ang Lisa, no? So, malayo pa tayo. Okay. 1987, first VGA monitor. But the Lisa was already in 1983. Okay. Released in 1987. Okay. So, I haven't used this as a student yet anymore. The VGA can now run video. First IBM computer, which has a VGA monitor, is the IBM 8513. It's a personal computer with a VGA monitor. Okay, the SVGA computer display was defined by VESA. There's a different VGA card, no, with a higher resolution. By the late 1980s, you now have a 720. This is now a HD. HD came during the late 1980s, where CRT monitor can now have 1024 by 768. Remember, HD is limited at 720 during that time, no? Kasi 480 pa yung digital resolution. Okay, 480. So by 720, you will have double the resolution. So HD was released in 1980. The LCD monitor came in 1990s. No? The LCD. 1997, LCD monitors were released by Apple, IBM, and ViewSonic. 1997. So yeah, during those times, LCD na. Ibig sabihin, CRT is trying to go out of the market. In 1998, no, the earliest affordable LCD was introduced by Apple for the desktop computers. And the CRT became obsolete in 2003. Okay. Touch-based monitor, LCD pa, in 2006, introduced by Jeff Hand. Touch screen was first introduced in 2006. Now in 2009, LED. Okay, for desktop computers. There were already LED TVs, of course, but for desktop computers, LEDs were introduced in 2009. 2010, AMD and Intel produced a handful of VGA monitors. 2017, I think there's already a full HD. And now we already have Ultra HD. Pasinulat na, it's not part of this history yet. When did we have Ultra HD? Full HD. Look for that, no, but it's not very late. It's yeah, I think 2017, 2018. That's a full HD. That's the time of the full HD and Ultra HD. Do you follow? Any questions so far? Hanggang anong oras ba tayo? Just check. 10:50. So we still have time, no? We'll just go lightly, no? Talk out the stories, okay? Just go through the stories, okay? history of the monitor, and then yeah, IBM PC. Can you read this, no? In case we don't finish. Okay. Kasi by 1970s, the IBM PC, IBM as a company stopped producing the S360 because it's very expensive. Okay. Instead, okay, they focus their attention to the personal computer market or the microcomputer market. Something that DEC did not do. That's why DEC eventually went bankrupt. 1975, no? Okay, 5100, the first portable. It was first called portable computer. Okay, the actual computer was produced in 1981. This is IBM PC, but in 1975, no, IBM produced, or rather introduced, the portable computer. It was not technically a microcomputer. It used a processor IBM developed in-house, so they have their own processor. It was not using Intel. Okay. Officially, the first IBM computer was released in 1981. Okay. So it started working on the IBM PC in 1978 using the Intel 8085 microprocessor. And the cost of the IBM PC during that time is $10,000 range. Wow, $10,000. It's about $500,000 pesos. 10,000 times 10, 100 times 12. Yeah. Qualitatively different from the machines, no? But the button personally continued to make it feel that they are better than the Apple II. Yet it was technically a microcomputer, no? It was really a microcomputer because it's based on the Intel 8085. It was already a huge company because it made millions with the 709, no? The mainframes they were producing. Okay. Now, the official, no, first IBM PC is 1981. Still, the question of the first microcomputer comes in a trivia game. There's your answer. 1981 was the first release of the IBM PC. You have what you have there is an Atari machine, which was used to be, was believed to be the genesis, the origin of the IBM PC. You follow? Atari 400 and Atari 800. They made personal proposals to IBM during the 1980, and in 1981, the IBM PC was released. Okay. Ito. When did Bill Gates and Steve, it's actually Paul Allen, Bill Gates, and Steve Ballmer came into the picture? In 1984, they were producing, they proposed to IBM to make an operating system. But during that time, no, Microsoft was already producing the basic language. 12-year-old, no? So the first attempt was to make a standard operating procedure for the IBM. Actually, these were the early stages of the operating IBM PC, of the DOS, the Microsoft DOS. No? August 8, 1984, after consulting with Gates for the machine, many people, the triumph of the nerds, sila Paul Allen, Bill Gates. Okay. Open architecture, no, was released by Zilog Z80. These were the first, no. These were the predecessors of the Apple computer. 64K of memory. Okay. But the 64K memory is already becoming a problem. It's too small. The Apple II computer has 16K of ROM and 48K of RAM. Even where CPU's limitations weren't yet a problem, because they cannot run graphical user interfaces yet. Okay, so you read this. Okay, now they were first in search of of an operating system, no? In August ito, no? Kasi wala silang operating system, but they have a basic environment, basic from Microsoft, no? So Microsoft was already serving basic in 1981, no? Even in 1980, for Apple computers, Commodores, and Radio Shack. No? That was the first market of Microsoft. Basic is the programming language, third level programming language. Okay. So in 1980, no, Zilog released the CPM operating system. I'm not sure if it's running graphics, no, but it's a disk operating system. Because it only runs on the Z80 computers, Apple therefore cut them off, no, from their computers. Kasi Z80 lang yung processors, and during that time, Apple have used other processors. These are Motorola computers, no? And since those processors do not run the CPM operating system, they scrap them out. Okay. The first, no, in when was that? Apple released the first worksheet, no? What's the first electronic worksheet? It's called BC-Calc. When was that? Around 1980s. You find that out, no? That's another trivia. What was the first electronic spreadsheet called? It was BC-Calc. It's like Excel. You follow? It was like Excel running on the Apple computers. No? Okay. BC-Calc became a very popular program. Okay. Let's look at that. I'm looking for the time when DOS was introduced. No? So CPM was in the Zilog. So many stories. No? Let's look at that. QDOS. QDOS was the first version of DOS, which was released by Microsoft, no? To replace the CPM, which runs on 8088. We'll have that in the history of Microsoft Windows. You read this now, the complete history of the IBM PC. It's part 2 now. Read this because we will include this in our exam. Okay. Any questions so far? '86, 1986. There's already DOS. No? Now, IBM initially proposed to Microsoft that they develop the operating system together, but Bill Gates bolted out of the project by 1986, such that during that time, Microsoft got the patent to DOS, so that IBM computers were forced to run DOS in 1986. No? Do you follow? So IBM PC was selling operating system for a grand total of $25,000. So what happens is that when IBM is sold, the proceeds from the hardware goes to IBM, but the proceeds to the operating system goes to Microsoft. So Microsoft had an easy time selling their operating system because IBM is selling it for them in 1986. Okay, you follow? Can you read this yourself? No? Okay? Kasi next time, we'll go into the history of the internet. And then we'll look at the history of uh, Microsoft itself. No? History of Microsoft. Microsoft Windows. And then we'll just finish this next meeting. And then by the weekend, we will have our practice test. Okay? I'll upload the practice test. Make sure you go through. There's a, no. 1981 was MS-DOS, the release of MS-DOS after the C80. Okay. This is the history of Microsoft Windows. Windows 1 is 1985, and the popular Windows 3 is 1990 to 1994. You follow? We've used this a lot. This is a 16-bit Windows. No? It's like the Mac OS. No? The main difference is the taskbar is at the bottom. Let's Google Windows 3.0. During the time, no, there's already a Windows in there's already a Windows in Linux. It's called X Windows. You follow? Uh, look, look at that. This is the Windows 3.0 machine, rather interface. This is very similar to the Mac OS. Okay, do you follow? No, the Mac OS. The Mac was already running. Was already running graphical user interfaces during those times. No? 1917, 1983, my Mac is already running. So if Windows is 1990, by 1985 or 86, Mac was already running a graphical user interface. Do you follow? No? Itong Windows 1.0 did not become popular. The first Windows that became popular is Windows 95. August 1995 was the release date. It was popular because it was the first 32-bit Microsoft Windows by Microsoft. Windows NT. NT. What does NT mean? Next, no, whatever it is, no, was released in 1993. This is to compete with Linux or with Unix, no, because this is a server platform like the Unix OS at that time. Windows 98, a very popular version. Okay, I've used this for a long time. I've also used Windows ME. These are 32-bit versions of Windows. Windows 2000 was not popular. Windows XP is a popular version, 32-bit. This is the first Windows with a 64-bit version of Windows XP. Windows Vista was unpopular. Windows 7 is still there. Windows 8 did not, and we now have Windows 10. Windows 11 is announced to be soon released. 1991, yung IBM, no? MS-DOS was released in 1981 for the IBM PC. Okay. 1985, yung first Windows to compete with the Apple computers, but this did not succeed. Windows 3.0 is the first successful Microsoft Windows release, running for 386. Windows 95 was very successful. So you have a chronology of all Windows there, no? So I think you need to look at yourself. So we look at the history of the internet, no? Next meeting. Okay. Any questions so far? No? This is the last topic that we will have. We'll have the last topic next meeting. Okay, and then by over the weekend, you can read this in advance, no? The history of the internet and the World Wide Web. Okay, ito. Last topics. And then we will have a practice test by the weekend. Then we will have discussions by next week. And then, of course, our expected formative test. This is a long test, no? 100 item test. Okay, this is a 100 item test covering history of computing. Okay, any questions so far? So if you have no questions, thanks for coming. Did I miss anyone? Suarez? Let's check. Tavares, are you? Kindly text me, no? Buwalan. Who else is
Chavez
here?
po,
Yes.
sir.
Chavez. Who
Thank
else?
you.
Can you just chat me, no? Or Cordova. Torres. Lim. Tavares is from Bamana. And Perez. Perez Jean-Marc, you're here. Okay. See you next meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Pati yung last meeting, buwalan. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
Goodbye, sir. Thank you,
Bye.
sir.
Thank you. Okay. See
Thank you,
next week.
sir.
Sir.
So study na.
Sir.
Okay. Our next exam, our first exam will be next week. Okay. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir.